Hi everyone, Barry Carter here with Dara as always. Many of you will know that we have just launched a website, simplifypoker.com. And one of the many things that has happened since we've done that is a lot of people have asked for future content ideas. And there was one that really stood out. Lots and lots and lots of people asked for this. So we're going to do it today. And this one's a bit close to my heart, actually, Dara, because this is something that I always struggled with. So the crux of it is, as we can see in front of us now, we have a range on GTO Wizard. Everyone was asking us how how to put people on ranges, and I guess also how to memorize those ranges and how to keep, there's what, like 40 hands potentially in here. How to keep all of those plates spinning at once. Yeah, this is something I struggled with. I have a few methods that have helped me, which I'll perhaps share at the end of this. But yeah, this is how do we keep these ranges in our head, Dara?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of different ways of coming at this. Players who study a lot with solvers are used to seeing grids like the one you can see on the screen, where they're used to thinking, okay, this is how they think about a range. Now, very few people have that natural ability. Stu Unger, apparently, this is exactly how he saw ranges. And we're going to talk through, let's call it the Stu Unger method. But even if you find these grids a little bit daunting, as you get used to them, you'll obviously get better at this. But there's a couple of tips we can give. So for the purpose of this, what I'm going to ask Barry, imagine you played a hand recently against. Think of some player that you know how they play roughly.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah,
Have an idea how loose they are, and either
yeah.
you're on the button and you raise, and they defend the big blind, or the other way around, whichever way you prefer.
Okay, we'll put all right, yeah, okay. I'll be the button, and
Okay, so
no, I'll even name the player because there's no way that he's ever going to watch this video, but he's well known in UK poker circles. He's a player called Lawrence Gosney. He's a British bracelet winner who's aggressive, let's say.
yeah. Okay. He's a very good example because he'll be playing pretty non-standard, I imagine. Okay.
Yeah.
So as a well-studied player, Barry obviously knows his own ranges. So
Mhm.
if it falls to Barry on the button, he probably has this range. Maybe he changes his range slightly because it's Lawrence in the big blind. We can talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
But for the moment, let's say Barry opens this range. And now this is the range that Lawrence should be calling with, just
Mhm.
calling. He should be three betting the really strong stuff.
Mhm.
He should be folding some of the bottom stuff, and then he should be calling the rest. We'll come back to that in a minute. We're going to do. Let's put up a standard flop. We'll pick a fairly easy one so that there's not too much complexity. Let's say the flop is ace eight two.
Mhm.
Now, rather than using the GTO thing, I'm going to use the AI solve,
Mhm.
and this is for purposes of illustration. Okay, so the way this bot should play is Barry should check. Lawrence should check. Barry should always bet because this is a very good board for him,
Yep.
25%. And then
Yep.
the hand kind of starts him there.
Mhm.
But let's rewind a little. Um, let's go back. Let's go back to where Lawrence defends. And I said this was actually the defending range. Now I'm going to ask Barry to look at this range and ask ask yourself a couple of questions. I think the easiest way to put players on ranges is to ask yourself what's the strongest hand in the range and what's the weakest hand. What
Mm.
or alternative, what's the strongest hand you think they will fold? So,
Mm.
um, first of all, do you think Lawrence is three betting all of the pairs?
No, I think he would. I think he'd flat some of the pairs, but he'd definitely be free betting some of the pairs. My kind of read on him is either he'd be free betting all of them half the time, or maybe he's like free betting everything from sixes up or something like that. But he's definitely going to be more aggressive than this with them.
Okay, so let's say he's going to three bet fives, fours, He's going to three bet everything above sixes, but he will flat
Yeah,
five, four, threes, and twos. Now,
yeah.
now you have to ask yourself, like, is he actually mixing with hands like king, queen off, or is he just going to pure flat them?
Yeah, again, back to my read on this player. My read is that basically he's going to be re-raising half of the connected Broadway hands. So he's the kind of guy that probably is going to flat Jack 10, but he's going to raise Jack 9. That's kind of the way I read him.
Okay. So, so you think hands like Jack nine suited are only are in the range half the time? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah.
The Jack nine suited, Queen nine suited.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Anything that can make some sort of Broadway,
Okay.
he's going to be re-raising it a lot of the time.
Okay. And then you think he's going to play more straightforward with other hands. He's probably not going to mix stuff like kicks, king seven.
No, no, no. I think he's going to be raising a bunch of shit too. He's a very aggressive player.
Okay, so when you say raising, you don't mean at 100% frequency. What kind of frequency?
No, no, no. He mixes it up. He mixes it up. I'd probably go like 25% of the time he'd be raising with like Queen Six suited or something like that.
Okay, so let's put a smattering of hands in there then that we
Yeah,
think
and
he.
this is interesting because I played against a second player who has these tendencies, and the only thing that was predictable was just there was no consistency to any of it. It's just sometimes he'd be raising with absolute garbage. Sometimes he'd be raising with very very strong hands.
Yeah,
But
it's
yeah,
not it's not a bad strategy overall. Most players are a little bit more straightforward. You can just
yeah.
they're going to
It-
three bet down to a certain hand strength, and then they're going to flat all the stuff below that, and then they're going to fold all the stuff that they think um isn't strong enough to play.
mhm.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I know
No,
this. Yeah,
he is he is, I imagine, he's always been a difficult person to play against. But if you've got any kind of hand, you just go with it against Lawrence.
yeah. Okay, so let's simplify it to this. We could obviously get into more detail. Now, do you think there's other hand like do you think he's going to actually fold Jack 3 off, 8-5 off these types of hands?
Um, no, I think he'd fold. I think he's going to call with any hand that can make a Broadway straight. So give him the 10-2 off, and but then fold the 7-3 off and the 9-3 off. So
So all the tens,
yeah,
all the jacks. Got you. Okay, so any card with Broadway. Okay.
yeah,
So anyway, this is the kind of exercise you should be doing. Ask from the start of the hand, you should be asking yourself, like, based on their call, what hands can I rule out at the top?
yeah,
What hands can I rule out at the bottom? And what hands kind of could be in there and might not be? We don't really know.
yeah,
So once you've done this exercise, then we can create the solution. Now, remember, we saw that this was a fairly straightforward spot against a normal player with a normal range. Let's see if the same is true against our friend here, Lawrence. And it is. It's exactly the same. I mean, the fact he has extra hands in there doesn't really matter.
mm,
Um, because most of his extra hands are shit. And
yeah,
there are some boards where more of his shit will connect, but on every board, lots of his shit won't connect.
mm,
So really, it just comes down to range versus range at this stage. Now,
yeah,
let's say we do range bet, and let's imagine. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to ask you what's different about the hands he would raise and the hands he would call. In GTO, he should be raising obviously his strong hands. He should be using some bluffs from down here. He should be calling the hands below that, and then he should be folding the crap.
yeah. I definitely think he would be somewhat balanced with the value hands that he continues with. So I do think he will have a mix of calls and raises with ace X.
Okay,
Um,
are you more interested in looking at his raises or his calls?
um, Actually, the calls are interesting me a little bit more because I'm starting to realize that perhaps he's going to be very, very capped in a lot of situations.
Okay. So
Um,
let's say he calls, um, and we're going to node lock for what he actually calls with.
yeah.
So let's take the calls. Okay. First of all, is there anything that he's supposed to be raising or mixing that you think he just pure calls?
Um,
Or is there anything he calls that you think he doesn't call?
no, I think he'd call anything that has some connection with the board. So
Okay,
I think he'd at
okay,
least call any.
let's start with top pair. How's he going to play top pair? Is he going to always raise it? Is he going to
I think he's going to mix quite similar to the rate to what we've got here already. To be perfectly honest,
Okay,
I think
so
he's
we
going to
don't
be
have to
quite
worry too much
balanced in that
about that. Like
regard. Yeah, don't have to worry
when
about
he
that.
so when he calls, he could have some weakish aces. He'll
Yeah.
occasionally call the strong aces as well for protection.
Mhm.
Okay, now what about his 8x?
I think he would raise quite a little. I think he'd raise 25% of the time with 8x. He's definitely of the old school of raise to see where you are kind of thing with a hand like this, which we know isn't necessarily
Okay,
the
so
best way to do.
let's give him 25% raise
Yeah.
on every eight. Okay, now what about his 2x?
I think he'd probably just call with the 2x.
He just calls his 2x.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
that's reasonable. I think that's the way most players play. Okay, what about two pairs? Is he always raising those, or is he doing a bit of mixing?
I'd say it's mostly raising with two pair.
When you say mostly, give it a percentage.
75% of the time.
75. Okay. So we'll change all of the two pairs to 75%. And this is the exercise you should be doing in your mind. Like ask yourself, what does he do with top pair? What does he do with middle pair? What does he
Yeah.
do with two pair, etc. Okay, next question. What does he do with his only set, pocket twos? Does he always raise that?
Yeah. Like I said, he might be unorthodox, but he is a smart player. He does have a bracelet. It's difficult to play against, and he knows his image very, very well. So he'd definitely be raising with his sets all the time because he knows players will be not folding to him that much when they've got an ace.
Okay, now next question. What's he doing with his other pocket pairs? Fives, fours, threes.
75% calls, 25% raises. Again, he's still got of that race to see where you are mentality with them.
Right, I'm just messing around here. I changed something here. So he's got. You think he's going to raise how often?
25% of the time,
25.
75% call.
Okay, so we make all those raise 25%. Okay, so now we've done all the mid hands. Now, what about the weaker? He hasn't hit a pair, but he has king high. What's he doing with his king?
Um, yeah, I don't think he'd necessarily be going too nuts with them. I do think he would. I do think he'd be bluffing a lot with double backdoor type hands though.
Okay, so
So
we can maybe leave those types of hands and
yeah,
those types of hands are in there already.
yeah.
Um, now, what about stuff like yeah, I guess Queen 10 suited falls into that category. Queen 9 suited a bit as well.
Mm.
Maybe he's playing those a little bit more aggressively. Um, right. Now, what about do you think he's overdoing that? Do you think, for example, in addition to
Yes,
5-3 suit, is he doing like
yes.
he's doing with like 7-4 suited?
I do. That's exactly what I think I do.
Oh, that's
He's very. My read on him, at least, is that he's very aggressive when he has some equity.
okay. Yeah, that's all reasonable. So we can turn stuff like Jack 9 suited into that kind of hand as well.
Yeah, yeah.
We can turn, let's see what other hands have we got here. That are not doing 6-4 off, I guess, even might fall into that category. 7-6 off, 9-7 off, three to a straight, basically. Strong three to a straight. Okay. Okay, let's say do you think he's folding any king high?
I think he'd fold most of his king high that doesn't have some sort of backup draw to it,
Okay.
to be honest.
Okay. And then okay, so is there anything else here that jumps out at you that he would play very differently?
No, no, I think, like I said, the big read I have on him is that he knows his image. He's very aggressive, and when he has a smidgen of equity, he's very aggressive.
Hmm.
Um,
Okay.
but but mixes things up a bit as well. Knows his
Yeah.
image.
Okay. So now, so let's lock that, and we'll node lock. And now, this is the way you should be thinking. Always think about like just break it down into different categories. What happens with top pair? What happens with second pair? What happens with third pair? What happens with two pair in his stronger hands? What happens with his draws? And then you just think about all the stuff that he folds. And you should constantly be revising the grid in your mind so that when he calls, you should now be thinking in these sort of terms. You should think, okay, a lot of the king high has gone away now, a lot of the queen high has gone away, but there's a lot of double backdoor stuff in there. Um, there's a lot of his weaker pair type hands in particular. If we go back and check if that changes our strategy, it doesn't.
No.
And this is very typical. Players often play too timidly against players they find difficult to play against. But
Yeah.
the important point I want to keep reinforcing this, even if you think somebody is wider and more aggressive, that is not a reason to play cautiously and passively against them.
Yeah.
Most of the extra hands that they're adding are crap hands to their range. So they just have more crap in their range. So you have to
Mhm.
keep punishing that, keep pushing your equity edge on a good board like Ace 8-2. It'll be different on different types of boards, but okay, so let's say he calls. Now let's pick a turn card. Pick a turn card
Um,
you wouldn't like to see against him.
a turn I wouldn't like to see against him. I guess I wouldn't like to see the 2 or the 8 pair.
The two of these. Yeah.
Or yeah.
Yeah, they're not going to be good against anybody because they're going to obviously make a lot of um, trips for him.
Yeah.
So when the 8 comes, now you're supposed to slow down most of your ace X. Most of your ace X kind of functions better as a bluff catcher now, but you don't want to
Mhm.
get into the habit of always checking your aces. So some of the stronger aces are betting. If you have the 8 yourself as well, you're supposed to mix. Now this is against a balanced opponent who's going to do the right things. Let's say pick a hand that you have. Pick a hand that you have in this spot that you would start to feel uncomfortable with.
Oh, well, again, because of this particular play, I'd probably be very happy with like jacks at this point. So that's I'd be yeah. My get in range against him is very very wide.
Okay. So let's test that out now. So this is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to like keep going with your some of your ace X,
Yep.
most of your 8X, obviously, which has improved. You don't have a ton of that. And then you're supposed to do quite a bit of bluffing as well.
Hmm.
Um, so let's imagine you do bet. First of all, I'm going to duplicate this so we can refer back to it. Let's say you do bet, and he raises you. Now, the first thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to decide what his actual raising strategy is. Like, he's actually not supposed to do much raising.
No.
But do you think he raises all of his 8X?
Yeah, most of them. Again, he's a player who knows his image, um, and with the ace on the board, he's very aware that he would be getting called down by most aces from against players who've played against him. So I think he'd be raising his 8x 75% of the time at
Okay,
least.
so
Yeah.
let's make all of the 8X raise 75%. And call the other 25, obviously. What about okay, so that's his 8X. Is he going to bet his ace X?
Yeah.
What percentage of
Um,
the time?
50-50, I'd go with that one on that.
Okay, so we think he's going to bet the aces half the time. or raise them rather, sorry. Okay. What about his 2x?
No, I don't think he's that crazy to just keep firing out with 2x.
Do you think he'll just do you think he'll call, or will he start doing some folding?
Oh, I think he'd be mostly folding at this stage.
Folding is 2x, okay. So let's say he folds all of this stuff most of the time. Okay. And this stuff as well. Where are the bluffs coming from now? What's he going to bluff with?
I guess. Let's see when bet call. I mean, what was? I mean, yeah. I mean, I guess he's just gonna. I guess his bluffs would probably just come from the backdoor hands that have picked up a diamond draw.
Okay. Do you think they're 75% raise or 100%?
No, I'd go 25% raise. I think he would be slowing down at this stage.
Okay. 25% raise. So all of his flush draws. Okay, what's he doing with gut shots?
I think he's probably mucking him at this stage.
Okay. Going back to here, anything else that you think is different? Is he going to be doing more bluffing than this, less bluffing?
No, I actually think he'd be slowing down at this stage. So I think
Okay.
like I said, he's an unpredictable player, but he's not wild or crazy. He's like there's a method to what he does, and I think uh, he knows he knows he's capable of putting the brakes on.
Okay. Okay, so this is the node lock version where we've load locked for his tendencies. We've considered all of his tendencies and how he'll play against a raise. Interestingly enough, we actually bet more against him now.
Mm.
If he's playing solid GTO, we're betting 37.1% of the time. When we're playing the style that we think he's playing, we're playing 49%. We're betting more. Let's look at what the differences in the ranges are. So let's push GTO here on the left and Lawrence on the right. And basically, you can see that against against a GTO balanced player who's we have to protect at the top of we have to protect our checking range. So, for example, aces mostly checks, but
Mm-hmm.
against somebody as aggressive as Lawrence, we kind of throw out the bet because he's going to do a lot more raising. So we play that part of our range much more aggressively. Um, just across the board, we're just kind of betting more with our strong hands to take
Mm-hmm.
advantage of the fact that he's going to bet. You can see that our 8x betting frequency's gone right up as well. We're usually betting our eights now. So basically, when we have a very strong hand, we're going to just bet and hope he gets aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
Parts of our range are not going to change. Like there's no point in betting a hand like jacks hoping to get raised. Like you're better off just check calling with jacks.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter how aggressive he is to a bet, jacks is still not going to be in great shape against the range that raises our
Yeah.
bet. So large parts of the range are going to remain the same. And the other thing that changes is we should be basically doing more bluffing because we're betting more value. We should be doing more bluffing, and I think this is the part that people fall down on as well.
Yes.
Um, they think, well, I'm up against somebody who's very aggressive and is difficult to predict. So, when I bet, like a normal player is going to fold 32.5%, but when I bet against him, I expect a different response. But actually,
Yeah.
his folding frequency, like if he doesn't have a hand, he doesn't have a hand.
No.
It's really you're sort of targeting the 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 part of his range that he shouldn't really be raising, but that he's raising because he just likes to be aggressive, and
Mm.
that comes from the top of your range, the really strong hands, and that the best way to get value is actually to be aggressive and hope he gets aggressive back. And that's a huge mistake. People tend to just go into bluff catching mode, check call, check call, check call against aggressive players. But actually when you have a very strong hand, you should be trying out the bet yourself and hoping he takes the bait. Um,
Mm.
now coming back to the topic of this video, like it's about putting players on a range. To summarize, we're not going to go any further with this hand. I think we've illustrated the main points. But to summarize, pre-flop, just think about the strongest hands you think are in the range and the weakest. So, if a guy three bets, just think about the weakest hand that's in there. Often, maybe it's a polarized range. So maybe he has like two clumps. He has the value at the top. So you have to think, okay, well, what's the weakest hand he would three bet for value? And what's the strongest hand he would three bet as a bluff? And then you basically have your two clusters, and you should immediately have those in your mind going forward. If you're playing against a flatting range, it's different. You should kind of think, okay, well, what's the strongest hand he'd fold or the weakest hand he'd call? That's the bottom of the range. And what's the strongest hand he wouldn't three bet or the weakest hand he would three bet for value? And that gives you the top of the range.
Mm.
So it's a useful exercise to get into. When you raise and somebody calls, immediately do that. Ask them, okay, well, what hands can I rule out because they would three bet? What hand can I rule out because they would fold? And then and once it's essentially you're putting them on a range by subtraction, and
Yeah.
that's always the case. You're always kind of subtracting hands from the range as you go through the hand. When we start, sorry, this is the Lawrence example. Let's put Lawrence back on screen. When we start and he checks to us. This is the range we have in our mind from pre-flop.
Yeah.
Then we bet, and he calls. So now we start to, rule out other hands. We rule out all the weakish hands that he would have folded, all the strong hands he would he would three bet. So it's kind of always the same principle. Ask yourself, what's the strongest hand he would take this action with, and the weakest, and then you can rule out the hands above that in strength and the hands below that. So then
Mm.
when we go to the turn, he has this range. And then when we bet and he raises, now we're down to this range because we're thinking, okay, well, he would flat a lot of hands. He'll three bet most of his eights, but he'll flat most of his aces. So he has far more 8x now in his range, and then he has his bluffs as well. And you can see that as we go through it, his range goes from this very wide to this on the turn, uh, because we narrowed his range based on what happened on the flop. And then when he raises, it's down to this. And often by the time you get to the river, there won't be much left. There'll be very few hands, particularly against weaker players who don't sort of balance their ranges very well and don't mix too well. People always shout out players like Daniel Negreanu for being able to name exact hands. But we've all been at the table with players who play very straightforward, and they play so straightforward that by the time they get to the end of the river, they have one specific hand.
Yeah.
Um,
I have an ability to do that, but it's only because I'm there going, don't have pocket twos, don't have pocket twos, don't have pocket twos. Fuck. So I wouldn't necessarily call it a hand reading ability.
Yeah, that's your intuition. Yeah, but that is basically hand reading. Like hand reading is a bad word because it should really be range reading. At every point you're
Yeah.
putting players on a range. So, but you just ask yourself, like, what are all the hands they would take this action with? What are all the hands they would open from that seat? Or what are all the hands they would defend the big blind that they wouldn't three bet
Mm,
and they wouldn't fold? Then what are the hands that they would check raise on the flop if that's what happens?
mm.
Uh, and then on the turn, when the turn card comes, what are the hands that they would bet again with? What are the hands they wouldn't bet again with? And if you get into the habit of doing this, it's a lot easier than you think because you can just break it down as we did here. Break it down to what did they do with top pair on the flop? What did they do with second pair? What did they do with third pair? What are their bluffs? What's the stuff that folds?
Uh, so I'm glad you've said all this, Dara. You and I have never actually discussed this particular topic, but uh, putting people on a range and the working memory aspect of it was something I've found very, very difficult. And it's only in the last year that I've fixed it for myself, in large part because of something you showed me, and I want to share this now. I think what might be reassuring to people who have just seen you go through that is at no point were you really calling out specific hands. I mean, yes, we talked about pocket twos and pocket aces because they were sets, but we weren't trying to juggle ace king, ace queen, ace jack, ace 10. We were just talking ace x, 8x, 2x. And that is a much more simplified way to think about a hand. And I think a lot of people think professional poker players are literally thinking about every single combination of hand, which they're not. They've got a broad heuristic and they narrow down as the hand progresses. What really helped me in GTO Wizard is this feature here, the equity buckets. Um, so we have best hands, good hands, weak hands, trash hands. We can also go, break it down based on like an equity percentage, like 90 to 100% is what we'd call the nutted hands. It would be the trips in this instance, and trash would be like 5-3 off, which has got nothing but a gut shot. But yeah, instead of having to categorize every single combination of hand, you categorize in chunks of equity. What do you do with your best hands? What do you do with your good hands, which tend to be like one pair type of hands? What are you doing with your weak hands? And what are you doing with your trash? And then I actually wrote something for GTO Wizard. I presume they won't mind me sharing this. Uh, this image here. And this is how I kind of simplified my strategy when I was putting people on ranges. Like people would have, what are their best hands? And I'd break it down. The best hands would be sets and two pairs. And then if I wanted to go further down, like what are the sets? Nines, fours, two. And if I really wanted to break it down, maybe what would nines, a set of nines, and you've got the club in your hand do in a situation like this? You very rarely have to get to this point. But what I found, Dara, is it's rather than thinking about individual hands, if you just think about clusters of hands,
Yeah.
and then after that, if you have to break it down into more minute detail, do so. But until then, just think 8x, 8x, 2x.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very good way to think about it. And I think also, like when you're playing against real players in the field, like when I'm teaching poker theoretically from a GTO perspective, I often introduce the ace king queen game where there are only three hands, an ace, a king, and a queen, and ace is the strongest hand, king is second strongest, and queen is the weakest. And the idea is that from a purely game theory point of view, you should be betting your aces for value.
Yep.
You should never bet a king. That's a bluff catcher because it won't fold out an ace and it won't get called by a queen. So you play that passively. And then the bottom of your range, the queen you mostly just give up with, but you have to bluff sometimes. So you use whatever number of whatever number of queens you have to balance betting the aces. So when you bet, you either have an ace or a queen. When you check, you have a king. Now, in the real world, when you're playing real poker, it can't be that quite that straightforward. You do have to protect checking ranges and so on. But in the actual world, most people do the same things with their strong hands time and time again, and they do the same things
Mm.
with their weak hands time and time again, and they do the same things with their middling hands. Now, what they should be mostly doing is they should be mostly betting their strong hands, mostly checking and playing bluff catching with their medium strength hands, their king X, and mostly folding or bluffing with their queen X. In practice, a lot of players do very different things. A lot of players, for example, love slow playing, so they won't actually bet their top of their range.
Yeah.
And as soon as you notice that tendency in somebody, you will start ranging them very differently. Now, when they bet, you can say, okay, he doesn't have a very strong hand because he would have he loves slow playing. He would check all his strong. On the other hand, when he checks, you're like, oh, he's got a strong hand. Um, so because he's so transparent in strategy, he's allowing you to do that. Some players don't like checking or calling. They have it in their head that raising and betting is good poker. So when they have a bluff catcher, a king in the ace king queen game, they actually bet. They keep betting. And then when it comes to the queen X, some players over bluff, some players under bluff, some players actually call too much with their queen X. They're just a little bit too stationary. So look for how people play those three classes of hands. Very strong
Mm.
hands, or best hands, as Barry's put them. Best and good hands are kind of in that kind. I guess there's really four categories: monsters, which I think of as anything better than top pair,
Yep.
top kicker, uh, good hands, which is top pair,
Yep.
medium hands, which is uh, second or third pair, and trash, which is absolutely nothing. And just
Yeah.
notice how people play them because they will play them the same time over and over again. And sometimes you can only rule out part of the range. Maybe you can rule out monsters because you know that they like to slow play their monsters and now they're coming out betting. But it's still very useful to be able to rule out all the monsters out of their range.
Mm.
They've effectively capped their range. So that's a good way to think as well. As think in buckets, as Barry said. But notice what people do with with different buckets. They're supposed to do a certain amount of mixing to be unpredictable. Um, but most players are far more predictable than that, and they're often making quite big mistakes. The other thing to be aware of is that obviously uh, your hand strength changes over the course of a hand. For example, you raise pocket kings, the big blind calls. You've got an ace in the ace king queen game.
Yeah.
The board comes down ace 8-2. Oof, you're like, okay, well, now I have it. Now I have a king because I can't beat any
Mm.
ace X, but I can beat everything else. So I have a kind
Mm.
of a mediocre hand. Now, in practice, you should still bet because this is such a good board for you. But nevertheless, when you're thinking about the hand, you should be thinking, okay, I don't have a super strong hand anymore. If you bet and get raised or bet and get and they call, you have to reevaluate. So let's say you do bet and get called. Now you really have a king in the ace king queen game. If a random card comes on the turn, you probably want to slow down and just try and get your king in the ace king queen game to showdown. On the other hand, if a king comes, what's happened? Wow, your king has just been promoted to an ace again, uh, and you can play it aggressively. Similarly, in the example we just looked at here on ace 8-2, an ace is a fairly is a mediocre hand on the flop, but it turns into a monster on the turn. The opposite happens in ace. An ace turns from a very good hand on the flop to a medium strength hand on the turn. So also be aware of that. But look out for the characteristics. Most people are too predictable with those four categories that we're talking about: monsters, strong hands, medium strength hands, and trash.
And yeah, so my big takeaways from this, Dara, are don't think about every single possible combination of hand. Put hands either into hand class buckets or equity buckets, depending on how you want to look at them. That's the first takeaway. The second takeaway is think about what the strongest hand and the weakest hand is in your opponent's in every type of decision that your opponent will make, and then fill in the gaps when necessary. And then thirdly, putting people on a range really is about elimination rather than it is about anything else. So, or put them on quite a big range to begin with, and then just eliminate, eliminate, eliminate.
Yeah. Yeah. Before they look at their cards, they have a random hand. So, and that's sometimes important. For example, when you're short stacked,
Mhm.
yeah, and you're thinking going all in, you just put them on the random range and you decide what they're going to call with and what they're going to fold, and then whether your shove is profitable. Every time they take an action, you can remove hands. Maybe not completely. As we've done and shown in this example, like we did a lot of 75-25. That's fine as well. but that will still shift the range in one direction or another. Even if Lawrence is sometimes just calling his when he improves the trips on the turn, when he does just call, he has less trips than when he raises. Um, and 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 he certainly has less than when he folds. Um, yeah, and always think about what's not in the range anymore. It's a constant source of frustration to me with when students are breaking down hands, and I say, well, why didn't you value bet the river? And let's say the board was jack high and a king comes on the river and they have a jack and they check behind and they win. I'm like, why didn't you value bet? And they were like, oh, I was afraid he had the king. And like,
Yeah.
and I asked them like, would you have called the flop and the turn with just a king?
Yeah.
And they're like, no, well, obviously not. So there's no king in the range. You do have to get into the habit of subtracting those hands. And just do it in very general terms. Like if you're going like, okay, well, he doesn't hang on with his overcards on to flop and turn. So now we can rule out not just a king, but also a queen and an ace.
Yeah. Yeah. If this is an area that you struggle with, we do have some free materials that are probably going to be quite helpful. We have a free ebook on how to study poker, and we cover all of this stuff in it. We also have a free course, a video course, with 9 of the biggest non-GTO leaks that people make in the modern game. And you can get both of those for free if you go to simplifypoker.com/free.